All things with China, it's a question of scale, and it's the hardest thing for us to understand because it is so big. We think of ourselves as big, but China is really big.
Yes.
And in the last 20 years, per capita incomes in China have quadrupled. Now they're about $1,000 in U.S. terms. But people who look carefully at these numbers like to multiply that by how much a dollar can buy in China. And for me, the rule of thumb in China is just multiply everything by 6.
Yes.
So a dollar can buy about 6 times as much there. So an income of about $1,000 can buy about $6,000. So a two-income couple can start buying washing machines and cars and financing homes. And this very fact is changing the tilt of the world.
Let me add a few numbers to it and just see if you can verify these. The largest producer of coal and steel in the world today.
China.
China is. The second largest consumer of energy today.
China.
The third largest importer of oil today.
Second largest.
I think maybe the largest number of Starbucks anywhere in the world. If not now, soon to be.
Yeah, right after Seattle.
Right after Seattle, yeah. Exactly. It has become the workshop of the world.
Oh, yeah. There's nothing that can't be made in China, and virtually everything is being made there.
Walmart alone, 80% of what it sells, I've been told, is made in China.
Well, they have direct relationships with 8,000 factories, and if you think of the things that Walmart sells, they're usually made up of lots of different parts. So you could think of those 8,000 factories as having their own relationship with dozens or more than dozens of factories. So Walmart's reach into China directly and indirectly could be tens of thousands of factories.
Is it simply a question of population? How did they get here?
Well, it's not simply a question of population because China's been the largest country for a long time. It's how the population's been unleashed and really how it unleashed itself. You know, the history of China over the last 20 years is how the people have found a way around their government and then found a way to use their government in order to create this incredible market reform. You know, to me, the most amazing story in China is not the big cities, which are an amazing story, and it's not the industrialization. It's how those two aspects of modern China are the result of rural efforts by China's very poor farmers about 20, 25 years ago, in which they were buying off local officials in order to grow a few crops. And out of the very small savings that these farmers got, they would move to the cities and start industries. So you see these fabulous cities in China. You know, Shanghai is the most fabulous city in the world right now.
Well, how do you define fabulous?
Well, it's the most energetic. It never sleeps. It's growing. Last year, the official census of Shanghai went up by 4 million people. You know, I'm from Chicago. You know, if you added 4 million people to Chicago, that would more than double the size of the city. It looks like the Jetsons. You know, the skyscrapers there are an architect's dream.
Someone once said about Shanghai that the financial center alone is the size of Chicago.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. Yeah, I mean, every block is a city. And there's been 5,000 buildings over 15 stories built there in the last 6 years. You know, I don't think Chicago has 5,000 cities over 15 stories. And but those cities, as urban as they look to us, are really collections of people from the countryside who've come from all over. You know, the city is one neighborhood after another of these rural hollows of people who have found a present in China's urban industrialized future, really.
What's the threat to the United States?
Well, the threat to the United States primarily is that we won't know how to deal with China as it rises, that we will play our game the way we've been playing. You know, there is no God-given right for the United States to be the richest economy in the world. And some simple math tells us that it's not going to last forever, Charlie. China has between 5 and 6 times our population. My favorite statistic about China is that the rounding error on their census is about the whole size of the United States. You know, might have an extra 300 million people. And you get that by extrapolating back from their use of grain.
The population is what, 1.5 or 6?
Officially, it's 1.3, could be 1.6 billion. You know, the rural population that has moved towards the eastern cities in China, which is about 150 million people, is bigger than the workforce of the entire United States. These are just the people who've come recently to look for work in the cities. And so when you ask, is China a threat or a promise to the United States, you know, we have to figure out how to compete in a world which will have China as the largest economy in the world. You know, if they have 1/5 our per capita income, they will be an economy as large as ours. And at the same time, it will still be the world's choice where to send the lowest wage work to create the lowest cost products, while at the same time producing very aggressively in the high-end spheres of the economy in which we now excel. And we've never faced anything like that before. We've never faced someone who can hit us on both ends.
Frequently people will argue that the United States and China are locked into a kind of embrace in which they need our markets and we need them to continue to hold dollars.
Right.
And so therefore, and we also like their markets too, that therefore there is a kind of mutual dependence between the two of us, but they're alarmed by the threat that China, if it dumped, having the second largest holdings of dollars in the world, began to dump dollars, it would do terrible things to our economy and put the world economy in a spin.
Yeah, we are in an embrace like Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield, right?
Yeah.
It's like who's going to bite whose ear first. China right now has extraordinary economic power over us, which is disproportionate to its current economic footprint. You know, China has an economy that still is around a tenth or a ninth the size of the United States. Our manufacturing sector alone is bigger than all of China's economy. That's something people lose sight of because we focus on the growth. But having said that, the style of their economy has allowed them to accumulate vast sums of dollar reserves, foreign currency reserves, and they invest these in our government debt market. So they're financing the things you and I spend on. They're financing the things our governments spend on, and it gives them a lot of power. On the other hand, you know, there's this very complicated relationship between China's foreign currency reserves, how it plays its currency in the world market, pegging it to the dollar, and how it affects the interest rates you and I pay for the things we borrow money for, the things that businesses borrow money for, the things that government borrow money for. So if they pulled out of our debt market, you know, interest rates would go up. We would probably spend less on Chinese goods. The Chinese economy would falter. And here you have this dangerous codependency that you were talking about.
When you look at the corollary to what is their objective, as far as you know, as far as you can determine in terms of talking to experts? Do they want to be simply an economic power and use that influence to have significant global power? Or do they have military and strategic goals beyond what they frequently express in Taiwan?
Well, you know, the Chinese have 1.3 to 1.6 billion different desires.
Yes.
But
it is a small and tight leadership at the top.
Right, but the leadership's desires, leadership very much tries to define the people's desires, but often doesn't get the message across, and it often does. It depends on the sphere. So let's talk about economics first. You know, what the Chinese people want most of all is for the government to get out of their way so that they can start businesses, so the government doesn't intrude. You know, right now there's a very privileged economic class in China. It happens to be the privileged political class in China. And that is an impediment to a lot of businesses. Having said that, you know, China over the last 20 years, especially over the last 10 years, has started 85 million private businesses outside the government sphere. This is a place where the government controlled all of the economy 20 years ago, where it owned the pots and pans in your kitchen, and where it owned your chopsticks.
Yeah. But people still say that in most businesses in China, the government has a percentage of most of them.
Well, it might be the government. It might be people in the government investing their own money. There are so many different corporate structures in China because every year you get a different style of business that comes up. And what this creates is vast cross currents of conflicts of interest which are very hard to penetrate. And they define, they offer the answer to your question, what does China in the long run want? You know, you have all of these interests that want to lasso their fortunes to China's rapidly rising economy, an economy that rises 9% a year. On the other hand, there's this interesting dynamic, which is the more China prospers, the more it gets global, the more it also becomes nationalistic. You know, it has defined itself in terms of the rest of the world. Yeah. It has defined itself as something distinctly Chinese, which is natural.
And people will say that it's gone from communism to nationalism.
I think there's some truth in that. Yeah, I mean, there's very little classically Chinese about the communist leadership. They keep the Chinese name. But, you know, if you go and you talk to people in China and you come across people in the government, they will tell you, oh, their sons and daughters went to American schools. They often went to the best business schools. They are the captains of industry in China, and they're very proud of this fact. They don't talk about redistributing income. They don't talk about, you know, state ownership anymore. It's really, you know, the fortunes of their family and of China's, you know, burgeoning entrepreneur class.